So where we left off when we were talking about murder and homicide, we briefly touched on the different degrees of murder, and we looked at, some of the circumstances that could differentiate between a first-degree murder or second-degree murder. Remember, the first-degree murder is this willful, negligent act of taking someone out, having just no regard for human life. That's usually punishable by life in prison in many cases, or the death penalty. The second-degree murder, it's still a very reckless act, but there is a something called deliberate indifference, right? And in that case, the person usually gets 25 years to life, but depending on the circumstances. And then, of course, manslaughter. Well, picking up here in this chapter, Interpersonal Violence, I want to talk about serial killers. Now, the definition of a serial killer has been put forth by the FBI. Now, I have a class called Homicide. It's a very popular class. It was very, very successful. I'm looking forward to that class again in the future. But in homicide, and even in victimology, when I talk about homicide victimization, the definition does vary. So criminologists like to say 3 or more people in 3 or more separate events. However, most people who are dealing with criminal profiling, working with the FBI, trying to go after serial killers and identify serial killers and stop them, they usually try to say 2 or more in 2 or more separate events. So it's a fluid definition. It can vary. It is something I like to debate in class. Do you think the 2 or more is better? The 3 or more is better? Why don't people try to identify and understand serial killers sooner? But it's a nice topic of discussion in class. Now, maybe you'll recognize some of these more notorious serial killers who have lived in infamy. We have Ted Bundy. We have David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. We have Jeffrey Dahmer. The person on the end to your right will be Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Down here on the left where the police department sign is John Wayne Gacy. He was sometimes known as a clown or killer clown. We have BTK, Dennis Rader. Then we have Edmund Kemper. I believe he was the co-ed killer. And then Gary Ridgway, he killed a bunch of people, on interstates and things like that. Now, while we have these infamous serial killers, real life, I do like to do something fun, and I did it in my homicide class. In a second, I'll talk about some of the fictional serial killers as well. But when looking at serial killers, generally speaking, they enjoy the thrill. They might want to kill because of dominance or dominating the victim. They enjoy pain and suffering of the victim. We also have the mission killers. Sometimes they want to reform the world or have a vision that drives them to kill. Mission killers, again, they're thinking about changing the world. They want reformation. And then we have the expedience killers. They're out for profit. They want to protect themselves from even a perceived threat. Now, this is what I was getting at. When looking at like the thrill killers, think about your horror movie killers, right? And I'm a big horror movie fan. I even tied this into my homicide class. You got Ghostface down here from Scream, Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street, Chucky from Child's Play or the Chucky franchise, Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th. We usually have at least one Friday the 13th out of the year. We have Michael Myers from Halloween, and then we have Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So many of these are thrill killers. You don't typically see any of these horror movie serial killers out there trying to reform the world or trying to take people out just because they're worried that they're going to be taken out first. They're doing it for fun, and they're doing it for the thrill of the kill. Mass murderers, typically when we look at mass murderers, we see individuals who are killing a large group of people in one setting. For example, you might get your revenge killer or murderer. They're going to target anyone, but they'll target a group of people. Maybe they felt some type of slight, or they feel like they need to get even with society as a whole. You have your love killers, motivated by a warped sense of devotion. This is one where you'll see the individual may go ahead and take out the family members or the loved ones or whomever, and then they'll take themselves out. They'll turn the gun on themselves or they'll take themselves out. The profit killers try to cover up a crime, eliminate witnesses. Think about hitmen. Although typically hitmen aren't taking out large groups of people. It's possible, but most of the time a hitman is a contract killer who's designed and designated to kill or take out one person. And then, of course, terrorist killers, and we'll get to that in the very next chapter. Now, a spree killer, not to be confused with a mass murderer, a spree killer is going to take out multiple victims, but it's going to occur over a relatively short span of time. Usually, it'll have no discernible pattern. So, one of the most notorious spree killings in U.S. history was the DC sniper. You can look it up. The DC sniper case happened 23 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. I was in college, so I'm giving you a little bit of age, aging myself, so to speak. But with that being said, the spree killer involved the man on the left, on the left side of your screen, John Allen Muhammad. He was in the military. He was very versed with tactical weapons and snipers and rifles. And so John Allen Muhammad just decided, hey, I'm going to start taking people out. No discernible reason at all. And he started to. The person on the right was Lee Boyd Malvo. At the time, Lee Boyd Malvo was 17. The only reason why he was spared the same fate and punishment that John Allen Muhammad received was simply because he was a juvenile at the times of these murders. And listen, DC snipers had Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and a lot of different areas on high alert. People were not sure where these guys were going to strike next. They didn't know if they were going to hit at a convenience store, a gas station, you waiting at the bus stop, you on your way to school. It didn't matter. They shot kids, they shot adults, they shot women. It was a terror-filled time in our society. And John Allen Muhammad was executed. He was given the death penalty, and he is no longer here. Lee Boyd Malvo is still alive, but he received life in prison without parole. He will never leave parole as a free person. Even if the advocates are saying, well, he was a juvenile and John Allen Muhammad may have coerced him, it didn't matter. Lee Boyd Malvo did take out several people as well during this killing spree. So I want to shift gears and I want to talk about assault and battery. When you think about assault, when you think about battery, maybe this is the most infamous case where it occurred and it had the entire world talking. You remember that? Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars, at the Academy Awards. You remember that? The whole world was walking. The whole world was watching. The whole world was talking. You had people that were in fear of Will Smith. I remember seeing articles and reading things where people were coming out literally talking about Will Smith. They were afraid that he might perpetuate violence against them. But the slap, what blew my mind when I saw this, and this again was several years ago, it was probably like 2022, could have been 2023, a couple of years ago. What blew my mind in this whole ordeal was everyone said Will Smith assaulted Chris Rock. They said it. Nobody said Will Smith battered Chris Rock. The easy, conventional term that society ascribed to the slap is that Will Smith assaulted Chris Rock. No, he didn't. See, an assault is the threat of battery or intentionally frighten the victim by word or deed. There's no touching. Touching is typically not required. If you're assaulting somebody and you're saying, I'm going to kick your butt, that's an assault. I'm going to choke you and strangle you, that's an assault. You're doing it by word and deed, folks. It's not the actual intentional or actual physical threat. It could be intentional. You can intentionally threaten and frighten somebody. Now, there's other types of assaults that exist. For example, road rage. Seen some road rage incidents, heard some from a friend about something that happened the other week. Violent assault by a motorist who loses control of his or her emotions while driving. You live in Atlanta, if you're someone that's taking this class and you know Atlanta, you've been through Atlanta, you've probably seen quite a few road rage incidents, and you might want to lose your mind driving through the Atlanta traffic. Aggravated assault is an unlawful attack by a person with the purpose of inflicting severe or aggravated bodily injury. Typically, it can include a weapon for the attack, or it can feature the threat of an attack, but it's aggravated because of the threat of significant bodily harm. That is where it becomes aggravated, right? Now, what happened at the Oscars was this: a battery. That is an offensive touching. It's a slapping, it's a hitting, it's a punching. It's the physical act itself. Batteries can be aggravated. Typically, it can involve a weapon, or it can be aggravated because it's going to maliciously deprive the person of their bodily function. So, for example, if you break somebody's arm, that's an aggravated battery because that person won't be able to use their arm until their arm heals. If you disfigure somebody by hitting them so hard you knock their eye out, it's an aggravated battery because now they no longer have an eye unless the doctors can successfully restore their vision. So it meets the criteria of aggravated because it can involve a weapon or it can involve a significant injury to the person's body. Domestic battery is the battery against two people in an intimate relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, two people dating. Can be a husband and wife, could be, it wouldn't necessarily be friends, even if it's your best friend. The law typically won't include that because it's entirely possible that you can live with your friend and you guys don't get along, but it wouldn't meet the criteria for domestic battery unless you are in a relationship. Now you could say, well, Professor Fields, you live together, so wouldn't you argue? Well, no, you're roommates. Right? So at that point, it's just going to be a battery. Now, if the cops determine that you and your roommate have an intimate relationship, even if it's kind of like on and off, then now it might meet the criteria for domestic battery. But that's where you need the law to figure that out. So, Will Smith did not assault Chris Rock. I repeat, Will Smith did not assault Chris Rock. He battered Chris Rock. And unfortunately, the media gets it wrong every single time. Now, what about robbery? What's the difference between a robbery and a burglary? Well, robbery is the taking or attempting to take anything by value or anything of value by force or threat from a person. Okay? Burglary is the entry into a building or occupancy with intent to commit a crime, especially theft. Now, when we look at robbers and burglars in action, of course they're going to look at vulnerable targets. They're going to look at easy access, and they want to make a profit. This goes back to the things I used to talk about oftentimes when I was in law enforcement, right? Easy access in and out of a crime scene. They don't want to be seen or caught. And again, they don't want to be seen or caught. They want easy access, and then of course they want to get in and out quickly, right? So having said that, robbers and burglars are going to look at what's a vulnerable target. What would make life easier for me to commit this offense, right? Is it easy for me to go ahead and, rob this liquor store because I know it's in a bad part of town and the cops are not going to come as quickly if 911 is called? Or does it make sense to go into a high-end package store or liquor store where the cops could frequent the location? However, if I'm able to get money out of the safe, I might walk away with maybe $500, $600, $700, $800, $900 as opposed to just $50 because nobody's coming to the liquor store here in the poor part of town. Same thing goes for burglary. One thing I want you to remember: when it comes to robbery, it's against the person. When it comes to burglary, it's against the building. You rob a person. You burglarize a building. You do not rob a building, right? You don't rob a building. Buildings are not robbed because they are not alive. But you burglarize a building. Johnny over here, who has valuables and belongings, he can be robbed, but he's not going to be burglarized. His home could be burglarized, but he personally will not be burglarized. So just remember the difference between robbery and burglary. Robbery is force It is violent. It is strong arm. It is against the person. Burglary is against the building. Oh yeah, there it is. Sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. So yes, when I was in law enforcement, I used to talk about this in rational choice theory. They want easy targets, senior citizens, children, disabled persons. They want to get in and out very quickly. First floor apartments, unlocked sliding doors. It's too much hassle for a burglar to go up to the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th floor of your apartment building. Yes, it stinks for you having to carry your groceries up there, and especially if your elevator isn't working. But they don't want to go to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th floor. They want 1st, 2nd floor, preferably 1st floor because it's in and out quickly. And of course, they don't want to be seen or caught. They want to avoid places with nosy neighbors. It's the summertime, kids are out of school. Yes, these are easy targets in certain neighborhoods, but you got kids that are home playing video games, out and about running around. You as a burglar or someone that's looking to commit some nefarious crime of theft, you don't want to have kids see you because they might be like, what are you doing? Or they could alert somebody, right? Now, another type of robbery is a carjacking. And just like I talked about road rage, carjacking is just simply the grand theft of a motor vehicle. It is done violently. It is done by force. You don't just go to somebody and say, give me your car. Because what are you going to say? I'm not giving you my car. Typically, when you commit a carjacking, you are typically armed. And there's a lot of videos out there, lots of stuff that, happen here in the Atlanta area where individuals have lost their cars because of multiple armed people coming up and either tapping them, making them get out, or, just taking the car by force. They could be sitting at a light unprovoked, and here's a group of people run up and they're checking your doors, and if your door is unlocked, you're a victim. You're a victim. So, in terms of other forms of interpersonal violence, one is hate crimes. Hate crimes are those violent acts directed toward a particular person or members of a group because they share a discernible racial, ethnic, religious, or gender characteristic. The reason why I put COVID in here, because the book talks about it, COVID-19 created a lot of individuals who decided to perpetuate hate against people who were Asian because of the fear and the belief that people from Asia brought COVID here, or myths put out there by certain groups of people that COVID is a crime or COVID is a disease that came from China or came from Asia, or these people are individuals who should be blamed for us having to quarantine and wear masks, etc. So there was a lot of hate against people who were Asian during COVID from 2020 to about 2022 or so. Where are the roots of hate? Where did it come from? Well, in terms of hate crimes, every hate crime has its roots. Some are thrill seekers, right? They want to join forces, have fun, bash minorities, destroy their property. Think about the person who's going to burn a swastika on a church ground, or light a cross on fire and put it on a church ground, or in a predominantly black or African-American community. They're doing it for fun. They might be young kids. They may have learned about race and hating other groups from their parents, but they're just doing it for fun. Then you have your reactive defensive hate crimes. These are where the perpetrator will rationalize their behavior. They do it as a defensive stand, taken against outsiders, and they do it because they feel that those people have threatened their community or way of life. When looking at the reactive hate crimes, again, they're going to rationalize their behavior. And in other words, they're going to say, no, I'm right and you are wrong. You're trying to take me out, or you're trying to do something against me. I'm the right one and you're the wrong one. The mission hate crimes, this is where we get the dangerous groups. So it's their duty to rid the world of evil. So you can think about skinheads, Ku Klux Klan, IKA. There's other far right groups. I'm not going to name them, but you can look them up though. They're out there, and they may be on a mission hate crime, depending on their stance against certain groups and races. And then lastly, you have the retaliatory hate crimes. And again, I'm going back to what happened with Asian Americans in response to COVID-19. 2020, 2021, 2022, you had a large group of Asian Americans and people of Asian descent getting attacked for no reason other than someone said that they were responsible for COVID-19. And so people felt like it was their job and their mission to retaliate against those people because they were the ones responsible for our way of life being altered. Now, workplace violence is another one that is noteworthy. It's the second leading cause of occupational death or injury. Who engages in workplace violence? Think about how some people who are, white, middle-aged man, lost his job, high income, high level of intellect and intellectual ability. When they lose their job or things go south, that's when they are more likely to engage in workplace violence. However, anyone can engage in workplace violence. People of color, people of other ethnicities can absolutely engage in workplace violence. And, when we think about other factors, think about how sometimes you might have people who will engage in workplace violence who have no connection to the crime or to the workplace, rather. They went in to commit a robbery and then it turned sideways. Anytime the violence is directed at a customer, a client, a patient, that again is not acceptable, right? And then, of course, violence against coworkers, supervisors, and managers. That going postal is something that is noteworthy because people who work in any industry, if someone is terminated or let go, you get folks who get disgruntled, and that's where that's where the term going postal comes into play. They say, well, I'm just going to take everybody out. And that's what it means to go postal. And then in terms of stalking is this pattern of behavior directed at a specific person. It includes repeated physical or visual proximity, unwanted communications, and threats sufficient to cause fear in a reasonable person. A lot of women have been stalked. As you see, the number is high. 1 in 6 women have been the victims of stalking, compared to only 1 in 17 men. But look at these numbers, and I'm talking mostly to you all as college students. That's why I talk about the college lifestyle as a dangerous lifestyle. 54% of female victims are stalked before the age of 25. So we're talking about, college students, college grad students, even law school students. We're talking about anyone that's 25 and under would have experienced a stalking at basically almost more than a 50-50 chance to be stalked. That's why the college lifestyle is dangerous, because it includes stalking, it includes alcohol, it includes certain types of assaults and crimes against women particularly. It is a very dangerous lifestyle. So I want to thank you for listening to this chapter on interpersonal violence. I had to cut a lot of things out, but I wanted to break it into 2 parts, with us talking about what causes violence, what are some of the root causes of violence. We did have the very sensitive topic of sexual assault. Who are the people who are likely to engage in sexual assault? What are some of the reasons behind that type of behavior in history? And then we shifted gears looking at murder, the types of murder, the different degrees of murder, and then we talked about assault and battery. Like I said, if you don't take anything away from my lecture, please know that the media got it wrong. Will Smith did not assault Chris Rock. Will Smith battered Chris Rock, okay? Help family members, help the media. We have a crusade to get people to talk about what the actual crime is. So again, thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next time when we talk about political crimes and terrorism in chapter 11. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.